Good morning, well, from wherever you may be joining us, whether it's across the county or want to also welcome those that join from places far away, like Virginia and my sister and brother-in-law and my little niece in Louisville, Kentucky. I'll give them a shout out. If you're not with us in Chattanooga, dreary Sabbath in Chattanooga, low 40s and just as gray as it can be. So that's the weather report from the base of Lookout Mountain in the scenic city. Tron, thanks for joining us. Most of you, I would guess, are no stranger to the individual sitting to my left. Tron Wilder, Tron and Christy and their two boys, Ace and Jude, have been longtime wellies. And it was middle of last year, I think, Tron, that Christy began talking to me about this organization in Chattanooga called Caleb. And in the fall, in November, October, November, December, we got a little bit better acquainted. Some of you will remember, if you joined us via video stream on December the 5th, that we did a, I'll use the word broadcast, from the New Life Church, about a mile and a half down Main Street from us. And Nate Williams, the senior pastor there, and I interviewed Michael Gilliland, who is the executive director of Caleb. And Caleb stands for Chattanooga in Action for Love, Equality, and Benevolence. And that's a real lofty sounding title for what represents really some real nitty-gritty tangible work that's being done in the city. And I want to drill down a little bit further with that with Tron here in just a second. But we spent some time interviewing Michael, and he introduced us to the organization. So some of what we may say here initially might be a little bit of a recap of that. But the well has held at its heart as a core value since our inception. We've always wanted to be a church that chooses to find ways to engage in our city for not just the spiritual well-being of people, but for their physical, emotional, financial well-being as well. And so because of that, I'm really deeply appreciative of Christy kind of taking the lead and saying to our leadership group last fall, hey, there's an organization I'd like us to get better acquainted with, and that is Caleb and what they're doing, and see if we can't partner and come alongside that. And Tron, you are involved with Caleb in a very tangible way, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about that this morning. And again, thanks for being willing to be with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. This is my first time being here on a Sabbath morning, and I can't remember how long, so it's kind of neat to see all the behind-the-scenes workings.
Have you been here for one of our video streams
I
before?
have not, and I had no clue you had all these people here. I didn't know you had Scott here doing people's hair and makeup. I didn't know how you had people look so good up here.
Well, you know, we don't look this good in real life.
You could have spent a little more time on Chauncey this morning, though, Scott. I don't know.
Well, you kind of have to play the hand you're dealt.
That's true.
You know. So.
Good point, Mike. Good point.
Yeah.
It's good to be here with you this morning.
Yeah, thanks for coming, man. I appreciate it. So, how did you first become familiar with Caleb? And what was it about the organization that caught your interest, desire to get involved?
Yeah, actually, you mentioned Christy and her awareness. Christy's a social worker, so she's a lot of times aware of a lot of organizations in the community, particularly those that are working for justice and equality. And I had heard her talk about Caleb before, but I didn't really understand it or know what it was about until this summer when I got a message on Facebook from a former colleague of mine. Her name is Donna Palmer. She's actually a person I worked with in Hamilton County Schools when I first started my career. She gave me my first job. And she sent me a Facebook message, and she said, I'm involved with this group called Caleb, and I'm on a task force that they have that's working towards education reform. And she said, we have a meeting coming up, and I'd like to invite you. I think that from what I know about you and the things that you've done in your career, that it would strike a chord with you, and you might want to get involved. And so that's how I first became acquainted with Caleb. I knew that if Donna was involved in this, that it was probably worth my interest and my attention. So I went to one of their online community forums, and particularly focused around education reform, and listened to what they were doing, listened to what they were all about, and then decided that it was worth my time and investment, and started getting involved further from there.
Very good. So let's do a little bit of that recap thing I was talking about. Tell us a little bit more about what Caleb is and how it's structured.
Yeah. Caleb is an organization, like you said, it's called Chattanoogan's in Action for Love, Equality, and Benevolence. And, that can seem, like you said, kind of hard to pin down exactly what they're about.
Right.
But it's a coalition of organizations in Chattanooga community. A lot of them are faith-based organizations. A lot of them are labor unions or other community nonprofit organizations that are coming together to work for the common good of our community. And those organizations have come together and determined that there are 3 areas that they want to focus on in their efforts. And those are education reform, criminal justice reform, and economic mobility. And so they have those 3 focuses, and there's a task force that's working on each one of those areas to try to work on very specific, actionable items that they can promote reform in those areas. The criminal justice group, they have been very successful. They're working to specifically make it to where there's not a profit incentive for criminality in our community, and so they're trying to eliminate the profit motive. And so one of the things that they've been able to do is create a community bail fund so that it's not only those people who have economic means or power in the community that get to stay at home or get to leave the jail while they're waiting for their trial. And so, because as you probably know, or maybe some of you don't know, if you can't make bail, if you've been accused of a crime, then you have to stay in jail until your trial, which could be weeks or months. And so they've created a community bail fund that allows for people who don't have those means to be able to make bail and go spend time with their families at home while they wait their trials. And that's been one of Caleb's biggest successes. That's the criminal justice reform. They're probably working on some other issues as well, but that's been their main focus. Economic Mobility Task Force is working on 3 primary areas. They're working on affordable housing, they're working on equality in transportation, and they're also working on promoting a living wage amongst our workers here in Chattanooga. And then the Education Task Force is primarily focused on disciplinary reform. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, since that's the area that I'm primarily involved in.
Yeah. In fact, let's move that direction, because what I wanted us to do today is drill down on the Education Task Force piece, because that's the one you're specifically involved with on a regular basis. And I do want to say that over the next 4 to 5 weeks, 6 weeks, we'll dedicate an interview time on Sabbath morning to drill down on the Economic Mobility Task Force and on the Criminal Justice Task Force. But today, let's take our remaining time and drill down a little further on the Education Task Force. And if you were to kind of give us an overview of what you consider to be and what the task force considers to be the most pressing challenges facing the educational system in Hamilton County as it currently exists.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, as we all know, education is an important part of any community, public education. And one of the other things that we know about education, public education, is in our country, and particularly in our city, it's a very segregated area of our community. It's a very segregated system. In fact, public education in the United States right now is more segregated than it has ever been since Brown versus Board of Education, when desegregation happened. And so there's a lot of inequality in how we provide services for our students in the public education system. And one of those areas of inequality has come through the way we deal with discipline problems in our public education system. As you probably know, as most of us probably know, one of the ways that we deal with behavior problems and discipline problems is through suspensions and expulsions. And the truth of the matter is that when you're dealing with behavior problems through punitive disciplinary measures, the research has bared this out for a very long time that just doesn't work. It's just not successful. It works for one thing, which is to remove the problem from the classroom, which I think is why it continues to be used, because it's an easy way of dealing with the problem. We say we've done something, we've removed that perpetrator, removed that person, but we've done nothing to fix the problem. We've done nothing to address maybe the reasons why that person has had behavior problems. And that's something that I've worked with for a long time. In my previous career as a school psychologist, I was working with administrators and teachers and others to try to help them understand that there's got to be a better way to deal with discipline problems in our schools. And so when I attended this community forum with Caleb, I was like, oh yeah, this is something that I'm definitely all about. This is something I teach to students in my classes at Southern, in fact. And there's a quote that I read to a lot of my students when I'm talking about this, that was given at one of the national educator meetings from some educator, and he said, you know, when we're in schools, when a student doesn't know how to read, we teach. When a student doesn't know how to do math, we teach. When a student doesn't know how to swim, we teach. When a student doesn't know how to behave, we ... And we cannot, in our public schools, finish that sentence in the same way that we finish it in all those other areas. The truth of the matter is, when a student doesn't know how to behave, we punish. And what we should be doing is we should be teaching students who may not completely come from a background where they've been taught how to behave in a community, how to do so. And certainly that's not to denigrate public educators. I think public educators have some of the hardest jobs known to man. I was working in the public school system for 10 years, and I always said that teaching is the hardest job. I was glad to not be a teacher because it's a really, really hard job. But there are some better ways that we know to deal particularly with disciplinary issues. And so that's the focus of Caleb, is to basically they've got the goal of doing away with suspensions and expulsions in Hamilton County schools. And that's a really, really big ask. But the truth of the matter is that suspensions and expulsions in our community have a hugely negative effect, particularly on those from a low socioeconomic background, particularly among African American students. And you can go to Caleb's website and you can see some statistics that bear this out. Even though Hamilton County Schools is made up of about 53% white students and about 30% black students are about 4 times more likely to be suspended or expelled in our school system than are our white students. And that's true not just in Hamilton County schools, but in all schools in Tennessee, actually, and probably across the country. Yeah. And so we know that suspensions and expulsions have a negative effect even later on in a person's life, and that can lead to further involvement in the criminal justice system. It can lead to dropping out of high school. It can lead to, just a lot of negative outcomes. And so that's their overall goal, and what they want to do instead. There's no magic bullet for dealing with behavior problems in public schools, but the approach that Caleb has chosen to promote in replacing suspensions and expulsions is something called I don't know why it's escaping me right now, but restorative practices, and that's a part of restorative justice. And so restorative practices are focusing on helping students learn how to live in a community, and that community that they're learning that in is their school, and helping them to learn things like empathy, how to get along with others, how to, when you have done wrong towards one of your fellow classmates, how to make that right. How to understand the repercussions of your actions and how not only does it affect you or one other person, but how it affects the entire community around you. And so that starts at the elementary school level, teaching them to live in community with others, teaching the importance of living in community, being proactive in dealing with potential behavioral problems on down the road. And then when behavioral problems do arise, instead of just sort of removing you from that environment, saying, no, you have a responsibility to those that you're living in community with, and you've got to make that right somehow. And so it promotes conversation. It promotes interaction when two people have problems with each other, and so on and so forth. So.
Wow, good stuff. I think we delved a little bit into my next question, but I want to make sure I give it. is there anything that you want to add in regarding to what the task force is doing work-wise in regard to some of the challenges they're facing? I know we spent most of our time there talking about the...
So yeah, I mean that's what they're promoting. So how are they doing that?
Okay.
How are they promoting that?
Yeah.
So one of the ways that they're doing that right now is through community forums. One of the things I love about Caleb is that you know, they're trying to build up a coalition of people who have interest in these things, but not only people who are directly involved with Caleb, but they want to spread the word in the community to build power in the community to get behind these efforts. And so what
Because in a way, Caleb is not an institution in itself.
It's not.
It's only an entity that makes a difference as affiliated organizations come to choose participate.
That's exactly right. And not only those organizations, but community members at large. And so right now what they're doing, particularly in the Education Task Force, is that they're holding community forums. And of course, that's over Zoom right now, which makes it really easy to attend. In fact, they had one in December that I attended, and I know that there were 2 people from the Well who I saw on there, and so I thought that was exciting to see other people from our organization attend that forum. And they're just really giving information out to the community about the negative effects of these punitive disciplinary actions and how they promote inequality in our system. They're also talking about restorative practices and restorative justice, and really just giving information out to the community to hopefully build up power, build up an organization, so that those individuals, not just through Caleb, but in the community, are contacting their school board members, contacting the principals at the school where their child might attend, and saying, we would like to see these changes happen in our public school system in Chattanooga. That's the main thing that the task force is focused on right now. Since I first heard about this, I was thinking in my own mind, what can I do specifically? What could I bring to this task force that uses my expertise or uses my, pulls from what I do in my day-to-day job at Southern? And I thought, well, I'm a professor at Southern, psychology program. I've got resources through students and through teaching research classes. What if we were doing a research project to see if these things had any sort of positive effects, restorative practices, if we could show that they were actually having positive effects as opposed to using punitive disciplinary practices, then that would be more data that we could use to promote this. So I thought, well, let's try to get a research project going. In fact, let's try to get some grant money to further promote these efforts. And so we just submitted a grant through Southern. Lucas Patterson, who is one of the people who work for the advancement office at Southern, he helped us write a grant that we will use to train several teachers, if we get it, several $1,000 grant to train several teachers at Orchard Knob Elementary through a pilot program to start utilizing restorative practices in their classroom. And then me and some of my colleagues at Southern are going to come alongside and do some research on those efforts to try to find out how that affects the students in the classroom, how that affects the number of behavioral incidences that are being reported to the administration at Orchard Knob Elementary, and how that how that affects even the parents at home and how they're getting involved or perceiving the community at the school. And so that's one of the things that we're hoping to do, is further this pilot program that they've already been doing at Orchard Knob Elementary and expanding that. And so that's one of the other things that we're really focused on right now.
Excellent. Very tangible. Makes a ton of sense. I'll just finish with one question, and we've already touched on it some. You've alluded to it, maybe not directly, but I used to work in an organization where we were a department that we were kind of an internal consulting department, and it was actually in a hospital. And so our group of 5 or 6 people in this little department called systems development, we would go work with folks in the emergency room and women's medicine and pain management, respiratory therapy. And our job this was when the qualitative improvement and organizational improvement was a big deal. This was kind of the turn of right around 2000, 1999, 2000. And they'd see us coming. And it's kind of like we would be given responsibility to go to we'd flowchart processes. We would look at how they did customer service. We'd look at the way their finances were structured. we were kind of the guys to come in and troubleshoot, and so they'd see us coming, and kind of like, you can see the eye roll almost happen. Let's hunker down till these guys get out of here, and then we'll go back to business as usual. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the challenge of attempting to initiate and promote change in organizations that you're going to do so as a volunteer. Is that a challenge? In what ways is that a challenge? In what ways are you guys kind of overcoming it? Just curious.
Oh yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, if you've just listened to what we've talked about, education reform is always a challenge, no matter what you're dealing with. And I mean, some of the things that we're trying to promote are not only challenging, I think, from a systems perspective, but are probably challenging from a political perspective. I mean, there are many people who see some of the problems that we deal with in Hamilton County schools, disciplinary problems, behavior problems, criminal problems in the schools, and say what we need is more discipline, more law and order, you know, more of that. And so that's obviously a big hurdle to climb, and certainly what you're talking about too is when you're an outsider organization coming in saying we want this to happen in your organization, there are tons of hurdles with that. And so so what I like about Caleb's approach is that they're saying we've got to build a community power that says we're demanding these changes in our community because the public school system serves our community. So that's why they're trying to build that power, build that community through these community forums. And I think that's one of the reasons that they're taking that approach, which I appreciate. Some of the other things that I think are somewhat helpful in that is that they have tapped into former public educators like Donna Palmer, the lady who got me involved. She was a supervisor in Hamilton County Schools for many years. Myself, other people who have had or currently have involvement. In fact, the head, one of the co-heads of the Education Task Force, is a current teacher in Hamilton County Schools right now. So there are people who have boots on the ground who are working in the system right now that can speak to the day in and day out, as well as other people who have different areas of expertise. And so I mean, I think that's certainly so there are hurdles and there are barriers that are in place, but Caleb's very aware of that and are trying to build a coalition of people that have connections, that maybe don't have connections but can promote community power and
is there a recognition and acknowledgement from the Hamilton County School Board at present and the superintendent in regard to Caleb and what's going on in regard to?
Yes, I mean, I don't know specifically about the superintendent, but I do know that there are those who are on the school board that have had connection and involvement with Caleb, which I think is absolutely important. But there are also people who I think are currently working in the school system that are promoting some of the same things that Caleb has been promoting. I think that this past year, all of the school social workers had training on restorative practices, and that was something that was done even separate from Caleb, that was done through the Hamilton County school system. So this is not necessarily something that Caleb is promoting that the school system or some people in the school system say we don't want to have anything to do with. We're trying to come alongside of them and pick up on some things that they're already promoting to try to buoy those things that they're already doing, which I think is helpful too.
Yeah, fantastic. Close with this little, let's put it practical for those that are watching. If there's a Welly or two or three that has an interest in this particular task force or even Caleb further, what steps would they take to get more further? What steps would they take to get involved to a further degree?
Well, I think the first step would be to just go to their website, and it's calebcha.org, CALEBCHA.org, and you can find a lot of information about Caleb, how it's structured, what those different task forces are doing, when they're meeting. You can sign up to be notified when their next meeting is coming up, and to get other information about the organization. If you're interested in the education task force, you can shoot me an email or reach out to me, and I would be happy to get you connected. We'd love to have more people from the Well involved in this and to give your time and efforts into it. But if you have an interest in promoting justice and equality in the Chattanooga community, I would highly encourage you to get involved with Caleb, because they're doing really good work. To your point about the barriers that we have with trying to make systemic changes. I mean, I'm the type of person who says who a lot of times says, like, I don't see that these efforts are going to have a positive outcome, so I'm just not even going to invest my time in it.
Right.
But when I looked at what Caleb was doing, and when I looked at the very tangible things that they're promoting, I said, you know what, this is something that I think is certainly worthwhile doing. And they've got very specific, tangible goals that they're working towards. It's not just some lofty ideals that they're working towards. It's tangible. It's doable. And I think that if you want to get your hands dirty and do some work, some organizing work, this is the way to do it.
Very good. Tron, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we could probably mention, too, they could touch base with Christy if they had. Christy is kind of our liaison between the well and Caleb. And then you're married to her.
And I can put you in touch with her.
Yeah. So, and I can get you directed in the right direction, too. I'm not as close yet with Caleb, but can certainly facilitate that. But, Tron, thanks for your time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good rest of the Saturday afternoon. I'll give you
Will
a
do.
COVID fist bump.
See ya.